So we're going to slice through and add our fillings to the cake. So you might want to use one flavour. Sometimes it's nice to double split them. Just depends on the occasion and how much time you've got. So another really good tip for doing this. Now when you cut the sponges, no matter how good you are at using your knife, or if you've got a cake leveller, another really good piece of equipment actually, if you do a lot of cake decorating, is a cake leveller. If you've got a cake leveller, no matter what, you're going to get undulations in the sponge. So when you cut it all apart, put it back together, you're going to have a little bit of lumps and bumps going on. So another top tip that we've discovered, again from the help of my dad in the kitchen at Fancy Nancy, is just to make a guide mark on the edge of the sponge, so that when you've filled it with your fillings, you can see how to put it back together. It's like a kind of sponge jigsaw. So take a sharp knife and just cut into the side of your sponge. I just kind of do a tiny V just to nick that out. So now I know how to put it back together, and when I buttercream it all over, that's going to fill up the gap anyway, so that won't show. So now you've got your guideline there, you can start by slicing through. Hold your sponge nice and still and just go straight across all the way along till you come out to the other side. I usually put my hand there sometimes if you don't put your hand there, it flings a bit of sponge off at the side, which is really annoying, because then you've got to fill that sponge before you start covering. So there we go, so that's all the way through, so that you've got your two halves of your sponge. When you're doing cake decorating and you're covering a cake, it's really easy to move your cake around and get a good finish around the edges if you're using a cake board. Ideally a cake drum is best. I've got some cake drums here. You can use a cake card, but with a drum it's really nice, because once you start working with the marzipan and icing, if it's on the drum, it's kind of a good guide to go all the way around with your smoothers. Pop some vanilla buttercream onto there, just so my sponge doesn't slide around. I'm going to place that on. Just make sure it's central. Sometimes you'll find with cakes, they shrink a tiny bit from the cake, so don't worry if there's a bit of space, we'll be able to fill that later. So now I've got my bottom of my cake, I'm going to pop it onto a larger cake drum, just so it's easy to work on and move around. And I'm now going to use a turntable. You don't have to use a turntable, but it really helps. If you do a lot of cake decorating, it's really worthwhile grabbing one of these. So this is a tilting turntable. So you can just pop your cake on there, it'll spin around, and you can also change the angles. But if you don't have one of these, you can just use a few smaller drums and pop that on there, or perhaps an upturned bowl or an upturned cake tin, just to give you a bit of height and enable you to move it around. So I'm going to pop a bit of jam on there. So just layer that all on. Get a nice amount of jam on your sponge. Obviously not too much, so you don't get any bulging in your marzipan and your sugar paste. So I've got a nice amount of jam there all over the sponge. So now I'm going to take some vanilla buttercream and add that on as well. So just take a spatula, pop that on the centre of your sponge, and if you've got a cake turntable, it does make it easier to spread and get it nice and level. So I'm just going to use my spatula with a kind of like paddling motion, so it's kind of backwards and forwards, just to sort of spread that all over, just twisting round. Again, if you haven't got a turntable, you know, you can just do this, it's not a problem, but it does make it easier just to get a nice equal amount on there. So that's all nice and buttercream now, nice and level. So now I'm going to have a look for my guideline there. Another point to mention as well, if you want to use any vanilla syrup, at that point you could just drizzle a bit inside your sponge. I've got some vanilla syrup here, just made with some equal amounts of water and sugar. Okay, so I've got my line here, so I'm just going to check out where my other half of the line is, so I can line that up. Sure. Okay, so that's all okay. So sometimes you can see it's slightly higher there, so I like to just use a cake board and just by eye, just come down to eye level with the sponge, and you can just see if it's nice and flat. if you want to be a real perfectionist, you can actually use a spirit level at this point, which we do. If we're doing wedding cakes, everything's got to be perfect, it's all got to be the right height. But if it's just a celebration cake, it's not too much of a problem. I'm just making sure that's all squished down equally. Okay, so now it's a good time to just take your palette knife and side scraper just to cover the whole cake in buttercream, which makes the cake taste really nice. And also it's going to start filling in any little holes, lumps and bumps that you might have before you put your marzipan or your icing on. So I'm just going to take a little bit of extra here and just go all the way around the side, just to kind of smooth off that vanilla buttercream that I had in the middle. Okay, so once you've got that all kind of spread round, I'm going to take some extra and just plop that on the top of your cake. It doesn't matter if you've got loads, because we're going to scrape it off, so it's better to have a bit too much. So I'm just going to palette that all the way around, again in the same way I did before, using my palette knife just to spread it backwards and forwards. And I'm going to be quite rough here because I'm going to neaten it off in a minute. So just so it's all covered all the way around. If you are really into cake decorating and you want to get a really perfect finish, you can use various different tools. This is a straight edge, which you can use for all sorts of things, royal icing, buttercream, just using as a guide to cut. So now I'm going to take my straight edge and hold it at the top of the sponge at a 45-degree angle, and just I like to come down at eye level again here just to make sure I'm being really straight, and just pull that all the way across. So that's going to give me a really nice flush straight finish. And then I'm going to take a side scraper. This is a stainless steel side scraper. You can get plastic ones. I think they're just a couple of pounds, quite easy to pick up. And I'm going to take this again and go all the way around the sponge at a 45-degree angle, all the way around, just keeping that vertical. I'm using the bottom of the cake drum as a guide now, just to make sure that's really nice and straight, all the way around, which is going to take off the excess buttercream and leave me with a really nice straight finish. So now we've just got that top edge there, so just go around with a sharp knife and just take off any excess bits. So that's fine. So that's a really good base for me to start. It's nice and level, the sides are straight, which is what you want to look for. You want nice straight sides, level top, so it's ready to go. So I'm going to pop this in the fridge now for an hour or so just to set, because when I do my marzipan I don't want the sponge to be moving around, so it'll help just to keep it nice and still. You don't have to do that, but it does make it easier. So that's all ready to go.